our own Daniel Palanker talking in the colloquium. Daniel is a professor of ophthalmology, so I can't even say this, but he's really a physicist, right? In fact, he's also a courtesy professor in Damoni, and he is in Apple. In fact, he was director of Apple for a few years back. Daniel started his studies in Yerevan, Soviet Armenia, those days, I guess. And then he did a PhD at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And then he was a postdoc here. I think we started here about the same time, or at similar time. So I started in 95. 96. So, yeah, right. So, and he came here as essentially prize postdoc on the free electron lasers that we had here on campus. Daniel's work is essentially on what we call the neural interfaces. That is the connection between electromagnetic affairs and biological systems. But in particular, he's active in developing various gadgets that are much more useful than stuff I do. That is, they really used either for diagnostics or for essentially therapies. In particular, he has developed some particular laser scalpel to actually essentially deal with when your lens becomes dark, camera, so find the word. But today he's going to tell us about the other thing, which is developing essentially what amounts to an artificial retina to actually fix vision for some particular issues having to do with the natural retina. So thank you for not coming, but for being here, and always yours.
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you for the opportunity to present this project. It's my longest project, starting now 21st year. Oh, you know what? Let's see. How about now? Is that better? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the introduction, Giorgio. And yes, I will be speaking about restoration of sight. Today, I'll start with a disclosure of financial relationship with a company called Science Corporation now that licenses our patents and commercializes this technology. And since this is a talk tailored for physics audience, I will be talking more about physics and less about neuroscience. But so I apologize for neuroscience part of this audience. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to address. So human visual system is a beautiful combination of optics in the eyes that images the world onto the retina with diffraction limited resolution down to about 3 micrometers, which matches sampling limit of the cone photoreceptors, which is also about 3 micrometer in the central macula. And then the signal propagates through the 3 layers of signal processing photoreceptors, 100 million of them, 10 million bipolar cells, 1 million ganglion cells. So there are a lot of compression of the signal in the retina. And then through 1 million wires, optic nerve, propagating to the brain, where it is processed in the visual cortex through multiple layers of visual processing in the visual cortex, in cortex in general, until the percept is formed. And I'll review in a few slides the electric machinery behind the workings of neural networks and how we hack the brain electrically. So neurons receive, generate, and propagate signals inside the cells. These are electrical phenomena. Primarily the processing is based on electrical currents and potentials. And then between the cells, the signal is transferred chemically, thereby electrically isolating the cells. But information is transferred rather quickly in about a millisecond or so through release of neurotransmitter in a gap which is a few nanometers. And so diffusion is pretty rapid. The numbers just in the human brain, there are neurons have on average about 1,000 synapses, and they are adding up to about 10 to 14 synapses per brain, and this is a remarkably high number compared to, for example, Skylake i7 processor, where there are 10 to 9 transistors, so it's a massively parallel computation. Each of these dots, the synapses, is a nonlinear computational unit. The electrical phenomena in the cell are regulated primarily by cell membranes. Cells are enclosed in the membrane composed of this bilayer of lipids, which have very high impedance, high resistivity, because it's a self-assembled bilayer with hydrophobic tails facing each other and hydrophilic heads facing the water. So resistivity without any other molecules crossing it would be 10 to 6, 10 to 8 ohm centimeter, while resistivity of cytoplasm is only about 100 ohm centimeters. It's a very conductive content of a cell, very resistive surrounding. And conductivity through the membrane is tightly regulated by ion channels and pumps. So sodium-potassium pump is basically a battery that pumps in one cycle of ATP to ADP conversion, 3 ions of sodium out and 2 ions of potassium in. So it maintains negative potential inside of about minus 70 millivolts. And all other ions, their penetration through the membrane is tightly controlled by selective ion channels. And these are proteins crossing the membrane that control the binary basically in states, open or closed. And the duty cycle of the state open or closed defines the average resistivity. The voltage gated ion channels are the most important in generating the signals, and they they adjust their probability of open state as a function of voltage. And there are also ligand gated ion channels that allows chemical opening or closing. So the ion channels are selective to size of an ion and type of an ion by chemical lining of the pore. And usually they're composed of 3 or 4 domains, gates basically, that control conductivity, and therefore the total probability of it being open or closed is a force power of each of these domains, and there are usually 3 or 4 of them. Other than that, the states are binary, so transition between open and closed state is sub-nanosecond, and the amount of time it spends actually defines the average conductivity. So for example, for sodium channel, if we change the potential from minus 80 millivolt to minus 40, it will open. Each ion channel will do it on its own stochastic way, but together it will create a smooth curve, and that's what we measure and that's what we model. That guides this millisecond event of opening sodium channel. For potassium, it's a similar, but it stays open. It's not transient. As long as the cell is depolarized, it's open. So basically, these 2 ion channels define the action potential. It's a unit of information in the neural network, in the neural system in general, neurons. Dynamics of these transitions is defined by relatively simple equations, Hodgkin-Huxley equations. I'll just briefly mention what's the foundation of that. Basically, transition from closed to open state and back is defined by these probabilities of alpha and beta. And both of them are instantaneous function of voltage. So it's a probability of the chain having certain shape. It's defined by the voltage. And with that, we can describe kinetics of this transition by this just simple equations, that the change in number of open state is proportional to number of closed state minus beta times of number of open state. We can normalize it by the total number of ion channels and have the simple equation defining the dynamics where alpha and beta will be changing as a function of voltage. And conductivity is just a power of this probability of fraction of channels in open state in the power equal to number of chains. So for potassium, for example, or gates, it's a force power. For sodium, there are 3 opening gates and 1 deactivation gate, inactivation gate H. And so the conductivity is defined by m cubed H. So that's about control. Now, if the pump maintains difference of concentration of ion channels on two sides of the membrane. This will create a difference in electric potential. And it's easy to calculate if you assume that in steady state, the flux of ions and the electric field, so basically the ionic flux, electric current, is equal to diffusion of ions. And these two constants are related. And therefore, we can calculate, if we assume that the steady state total current is zero, we can derive the equilibrium potential, Nernst potential, which is a logarithm of ratio of concentrations inside and outside. For example, for sodium, if the ratio is 10 times, inside is 10 times less than outside, it will be plus 61 millivolt. For potassium, it will be opposite because there is more potassium outside than inside. It will be minus 88, and chloride is minus 70, and so on. So this basically can be mimicked as batteries. And with this, all what I said, we can create an electrical model of a cell and forget about the biology and just talk about electronics from now on, mostly, where cell is described by capacitance of a cell membrane plus the batteries for each ion we consider, and their conductivity is being a function of voltage. So these equations can be solved, and we can derive basically behavior of a cell. And that's what did Hodgkin and Huxley. And currents are proportional to this conductivity minus times the voltage difference between membrane potential and each of these Nernst potentials for each ion, shown here as a battery. So with that, these equations, Hodgkin-Huxley equations, basically explain pretty much all the electrical phenomena we observe in neurons, and especially the Nobel Prize was given for explaining the action potential. So the action potential is a binary phenomena. It's when the cell maintains the difference in concentrations between inside and outside by pumps, and the ligand binds to ion channel, sodium ion channel, and lets them flow in. Cell is depolarized, the ion channel opens more, and so this is self-accelerating process until it's completely open and reaches Nernst potential for sodium. Then the ion channels for sodium is closing, and potassium flows out again all the way, because it's self-accelerating process until it reaches Nernst potential for potassium, and then both ion channels close and the cell recovers. So this makes, because it's such a self-accelerating process, it makes it very stable. And these pulses propagate through the neural system. They are amplified on the way, and they are very reliable units of information. So the cell generates action potential if it exceeds the threshold. For different cells, it's different, but basically there is always a threshold of about 10 millivolts, let's say, above resting potential. And if it's generated, then it becomes binary. It propagates, for example, through axons, and it's amplified on the way such that each part of the membrane exposed to the liquid, if the potential exceeds the threshold, will generate its own action potential. It will propagate another segment of insulated membrane passively. Again, next node, which is open, will regenerate this by generating it anew. And this event of 100 millivolt, 1 millisecond, propagates as a very stable pulse. So that's kind of very reliable system of transferring information over large distances. Over small distances, I will talk about retina, the signals propagate without amplification very often, and I'll show that, or without insulating, so the cable, so it is slower. But over large distances, that's a process. Okay, so with all of that, now we'll go to retina and see how we can hack into the system and introduce our own signals when retina is blind. So normally, retina encodes information of light intensity in photoreceptors as a hyperpolarization, drop in cell potential, pretty much scaling with light intensity, not linearly, it's some sort of sigmoidal curve, but it's proportional. So it's, in terms of electronics, can be called analog electronics, not digital. And therefore, its output is modulated by both amplitude and duration. In the second layer of neurons, called bipolar cells, this information transmitted through the synaptic connections is split into two pathways, on and off. So basically the sign of the signal can be either maintained or inverted. And then the signal splits into two pathways, but both of them are still analog. It can rise or fall in response to light intensity, and you can modulate it by controlling either amplitude or duration. And so it's still a very convenient place to intervene. But after that, the signals go into ganglion cells and they become binarized into action potentials because they have to propagate now tens of centimeters to the brain. And so they are converted into this very reliable format. But this format is much more complex. This code is not only on and off, basically information is encoded in timing here because amplitude and duration are standard. Everything is encoded in timing. And there are 24 different cell types that encode different aspects of vision. High resolution, some low resolution, others, high contrast, low contrast, different colors, and so on. All of these streams of data sample the whole visual field in parallel and all propagate in parallel. So we have like looking at this audience, I have about 40 channels or 30 channels of different aspects of this image transmitted in parallel to the brain. They are processed in the brain in different parts of the brain, and then eventually they merge into the percept. So the further away we are from photoreceptors, the more difficult it is to hack into the system and deliver this information as a proper code, because you need to now stimulate multiple cells. Information is distributed in a very complex way. Okay, so one more word about this complexity. What Retina does, as I mentioned, it converges information from about 100 million photoreceptors to about 10 million bipolar cells and 1 million ganglion cells. That's a convergence, but it also diverges from each photoreceptor to multiple bipolar cells and further larger number, about 24 ganglion cells. And therefore, each point in space is actually represented by a mosaic of signals in ganglion cells. That's why it's very difficult to encode. You can think about it as triangulation pretty much. If you want to encode position on a photoreceptor plane, you have to deliver at least to 3 ganglion cells information about that signaling, and it will figure out where it's coming from. It's a little more complex with something like that. And the cells have large number of synapses, so this shows how complex is computation and why you want to avoid, if possible, this very complex encoding and hack into the system as early as possible. Okay, now the disease we are treating called age-related macular degeneration, and unfortunately it becomes more and more prevalent as we live longer. Millions of patients are affected by it. In this disease, we lose photoreceptors in the center of the visual field, while peripheral retina is still normal. Photoreceptors are gone, but in retinal layers, 2 processing layers are preserved. And so that's what we'll be using to hack into the system, is to stimulate these layers. One important feature of the visual system is that it's very smart. It actually samples the field very non-uniformly. High resolution is in a very narrow central field, and then the density of cones is decreasing rapidly with eccentricity 10 degrees away. It's a fist at the arm length. We are legally blind, and then further away we cannot even count fingers. And we are completely unaware of that because we think that when we look at the page, we see something like that. In reality, we see something like this. Very small part is actually in focus. We compensate by eye scanning, so we are unaware of this, but we become painfully aware as soon as we lose it. And that's age-related macular degeneration when patients don't see central vision. They cannot read, they cannot recognize faces, and that's basically the disease we are treating. So when photoreceptors are lost in supporting layer of RPE, and 2 other layers are preserved, our approach is to introduce an array of photovoltaic pixels instead of photoreceptors.
They stay alive and everything without.
Yeah, they stay alive without input. So yeah, there is some rewiring, but not catastrophic, so we can work with that, but they do stay alive. Even horizontal cells that I didn't mention that regulate photoreceptors, provide lateral inhibition, they also stay alive, but they're disconnected. So goal here is to reintroduce something that will replace photoreceptors but utilize the rest of the neural network, and to come as early into the network as possible, so the encoding is still pretty simple and we can reproduce it relatively unsophisticated means. So we convert light into current, stimulate bipolar cells, and rely on these cells to convey signals through the retinal network regulated by amacrine cells into ganglion cells, and they will generate very complex spiking, and that will propagate to the brain. So if you look at this figure, the center is in focus, the rest is diffuse. Patients see something like that. And the goal here is to reproduce grayscale kind of image at this approximately resolution, 20 micrometer pixels with 8 levels of gray. That's the ultimate goal. I'll show you where we are currently in this journey. Okay, now how do we deliver information to cells? The simplest would be to get electrode into the cell, but we cannot do it with every cell, so we have to manage it with electric fields outside. But cells are fully insulated. How you do that? You utilize the fact that they are very conductive inside, non-conductive outside. So we apply a gradient of electric potential, electric field, and electric current, such that they quickly polarize because they are conductive. And one side becomes depolarized, so the step of voltage is increasing. The other side, relative to the medium, is depolarized, so step voltage is decreasing. And this way we can control transmembrane voltage. So basically thinking about equivalent circuit.
That needs a big voltage.
Not big. We are talking about thresholds of, say, 10 millivolts, so you need about 20 millivolt across the cell, if it's plus minus 10 on each side. So in equivalent circuit of a cell, it will be something like this. So the cell has a very conductive cytoplasm, and this polarization time is basically RC time of the cell. For spherical cow approximation is a microsecond scale. In reality, cells are elongated. It can be a little longer than that. So just to maybe illustrate it a little better, if we show it in with liquids, basically, if you see a flask, let's say here, floating in water, and this is our internal level of liquid, and this is external. So this pressure keeps the ion channels closed. If we tilt gravitational field now, everything will start flowing. So it's a river, but inside it will quickly equilibrate. And we now have a step of, so now it's in the same flask in the river, we have a step of pressure reduced on one side and increased on another. So if you have valves that are spring-loaded and they're closed in this situation, but when we decrease the pressure, this valve will open up because the spring will push it out, water will flow in, and potential will rise. So that's basically how it's working. In real cell is more complex. We model it by segmenting it into small segments, which can be considered equipotential. Each of them have conductivity inside, and all these R's and C's and batteries across the membrane, and we can solve these equations, Hodgkin-Huxley equation, and basically model what cell will do in response to any configuration of electric field. Okay, so now coming back to electrical stimulation. So we apply a gradient of electric potential, cell polarizes, becomes equipotential inside. Ion channels open, current flows in. If you reach the threshold, it will fire, action potential if it's spiking, or it will upregulate the output from its synapses if it's non-spiking. And we are stimulating non-spiking neuron bipolar cells. So bipolar cell looks something like this. This is input from photoreceptors, and photoreceptors are gone. This is output to amacrine and ganglion cells, and that's how we position electric field. Our electrodes, you will see later, are positioned under the bipolar cells, and our electric current flows in this polarity from an anodic polarity. So we depolarize the axonal terminal. In our case, what we utilize is voltage-sensitive calcium channels, and when they open up, the neurotransmitter is released on ganglion cells and amacrine cells. So this is our hacking point. This is how we enter the system. This is where information flows in. Now, one big limitation that needs to be kept in mind always, that you cannot deliver constant, well, conductivity in solids and metals is electronic, conductivity in liquids is ionic. And this transition is not trivial. You cannot deliver constant current into the liquid without electrochemical reactions. And you cannot do it because it's not biocompatible. So we have to operate in a charge conserve regime with pulses, which are sufficiently short to maintain charge balance within the limits basically of the capacitance. So we use electrodes with high capacitance, iridium oxide, but it has to be pulsed. And how we create a steady percept that we have to create with prosthetic vision, we use what is called flicker fusion. It's similar to cinematography. In cinematography, you have about 30 frames per second flipping, you don't see it because it's fast enough. So that's what we utilize. How does it work on a cellular level? It works like this. These are stimulating pulses. Cell polarizes, as I mentioned, very quickly in sub-millisecond pulse duration, but the calcium that flows in, that's what we introduce, is pumped out much slower with about 50 millisecond time constant. So if you go fast enough, calcium accumulates, and it has an effect shown here in blue, very similar to a step of function that would be in a normal vision. So basically, and after synaptic filter, it looks even more similar. So basically, the way to do it to create a steady percept, and that's what our patients describe. We validated now with patients that if you go at about 30 hertz or higher, the pulsing disappears and they see the image as steady. And this is because of this phenomenon of calcium accumulation. Okay, now another thing that we have to do, the photoreceptors are amazingly sensitive cells. They operate in a range of 8 orders of magnitude of irradiance. Between moonless night and sunny day, it's about 8 orders of magnitude of brightness, and photoreceptors can handle it all. There are 2 types of pros and cons, but besides that, there are many mechanisms of regulating the amplification. And we cannot do it with photodiodes. Photodiodes is in the best case, quantum efficiency of 1 photon to 1 electron hole pair, and we cannot do better, and we don't want to complicate the circuit by amplifiers. So we split the task of this photoreceptors into 2 systems. One external, which is a camera that does all the adaptation, autofocusing, adaptation to different light levels, and then projector into the eye at the intensity that photodiodes will do the job. So we have external component, which is augmented reality glasses with a camera, image processor, and projector. And then internal, the implant that just does the conversion, and it operates only within about 2 orders of magnitude that it can work. Everything else, the rest 6 orders, is handled outside the eye by the camera. It comes also with benefits that we can do image processing, which becomes very handy. Okay, so when light is on, current flows one way. When light is off, it discharges back because it's capacitive coupling. We stimulate bipolar cells, signals propagate through the retina and to the brain. Because the implant is completely wireless, the surgery is easy. And as I mentioned, if you now compare this artificial photoreceptors to natural, they do similar functions. They convert light into changes in cell potential. It's one function. And the other is to convey this information to second layer of neurons. They do it through synapses, and we do it through polarization electric field. So our synapse is basically electric field that we create right in front of our electrodes. Yeah.
So you have some electrochemistry happening
in our implant.
Yeah.
It's reversible electrochemistry and charge injection back and forth. Yeah.
Eventually, it must degrade the metals.
It doesn't. For at least the time that we observe currently in patients for 5 years, it's pretty stable. So iridium oxide can handle reversible pulsing for, as far as I know, indefinitely pretty much. If the material is wrong, if you exceed some thresholds, yes, there will be dissolution. Okay.
So the adaptive lighting condition. So you presumably want the peripheral vision still to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So the adaptation that goes coming from the side of the pupil and so on, that's you have to compensate for how much.
Yes. So yeah, it's a good question. I forgot to mention very importantly that the light we deliver from augmented reality glasses is invisible. It's 880 nanometers. So it's only stimulates the implant. The photoreceptors don't see it because it's much brighter than ambient, at least.
They're also getting actual input from.
Oh yeah, they use peripheral vision. You will see the glasses. It's transparent, and this is augmented. So it's on top of that you have prosthetic vision, and they see it simultaneously. They see prosthetic and normal vision at once. Okay, so yeah, so we split this role of conversion of photoreceptors into two. As I said, outside we amplify and deliver it within a range where it can operate above the threshold of stimulation. And so camera does adaptation. Image processing we do is also enhanced because we lose part of it because horizontal cells are disconnected. And we operate at flicker fusion, so it's a steady person. Yeah, so this, instead of normal 3-layered retina, it is 2 layers of retina plus this artificial photoreceptors. Okay, because the surgery, because the implant is wireless, surgery is relatively simple compared to other attempts to do it. We begin by injecting fluid in subretinal space. Then we make a cut in retina equal to size of an implant, a module. And then we inject this modules in subretinal space. Currently in clinical trials, it's actually 1 only, but in animals, we did up to 7. And you can tile the blind spot, the scotoma, and then retina is reattached and everything else is optical. So camera captures an image. It is processed, projected into the eye using near-infrared light, 880 nanometers. And each pulse of light is converted to, it's within a 1 to 10 milliseconds in duration. That's approximately the range that bipolar cells respond to. And these pulses are converted into pulses of current. So the implant itself is very simple in the sense. It's just basically photodiodes, plus capacitors and resistors. And all the brains are outside the body. This is how the implant looks like. These ones we make actually at Stanford. Human version I'll show looks similar, but a bit different. They are composed in the first generation of 2 diodes connected in series between active and return electrodes. This is iridium oxide, looks dark brown. And we have a shunt resistor to discharge between the pulses. And the sizes in humans now, I will show you data with 100 micron pixels. But in rats, we are now down to 20 micrometers. Okay, a couple words about this material. We use silicon. So why we do it? Because we want to make it operate an invisible wavelength. So peak of retinal sensitivity shown here in blue is in green. And we try to move as far as possible from the peak. It's 7 orders of magnitude at 880 nanometers. We could go maybe a little further to 915, but then transmission drops due to absorption of infrared light. And that's basically the limit. So we operate around 880, maybe 915 for this reason. For this wavelength, silicon is the best material actually with a quantum efficiency close to 1.6 ampere per watt. And for that wavelengths, the absorption penetration depth in silicon is about 25 microns. So our implants are 30 microns in thickness for that reason, because we want to absorb it. And that turns out to be very fortunate combination because it is on one hand thick enough to be sturdy and won't break. On the other hand, it's light enough that retina can hold, because there is nothing that holds it except for retinal reattachment. Just slide it under and retina holds it. And if it would be thick, it would start moving, and if it would be thin, it would break. So that's basically why we use silicon, why 880 nanometers, why 30 micrometer thickness. Okay, so that's about the implant. Now let's look at the vision. So first, to compare kind of apples to apples and see how our code is different from normal, we place retina on multi-electrode array, and we can record output from ganglion cells. And we can stimulate it either with normal visible light and just get normal signals, or we can stimulate with infrared light and put our implant and get prosthetic vision, and then basically compare the outputs and see how different are the codes. I will just summarize it. It's a whole long story about encoding, that we see preservation of on and off responses, which is very important. We see antagonistic surround, which is a mechanism of contrast enhancement in retina preserved in prosthetic vision. Flicker fusion, as I mentioned, decrease in response with frequency, very important. So you will see steady percepts at high frequency. And we see nonlinear summation between bipolar and ganglion cells. It's very important for high resolution. As you will see, resolution in rats, for example, is 28 microns, but receptive field of ganglion cells is about 10 times bigger. And the only reason they see 10 times better than the ganglion cell size is this nonlinearity. So it's population response, and it is preserved in prosthetic vision. If you would go to ganglion cells, we would have to encode the whole population to reproduce that, which is very difficult. Contrast sensitivity is lower by about a factor of 6 than normal, and so we have to enhance it. But fortunately, we can do it because there is a processor outside the eye, and dynamic range is reduced by about a factor of 3. These implants were tested in rats before commercializing, and then in large animals. And this is how it looks in the rat eye. This is how it looks on the side view with optical coherence tomography. The dark band here is a layer that we actually are stimulating bipolar cells. So how we assess vision? First, we let rats translate from English to Chinese and back. And the ones that fail, we measure like in small children with visual evoked potentials. So basically, you put electrodes on a skull. In humans, in our case, it's actually screws going through the skull, but touching the brain, not penetrating the brain. And we project patterns, and we can measure thresholds, and you can see here the responses. And interestingly enough, prosthetic vision is actually faster than natural by about 30 milliseconds because we skip phototransduction. We go to second layer of neurons. And that's actually big plus because now we have time to process signals without introducing delay. And we use that. It's exactly 1 frame, so we can actually do some processing, deliver it, and it will be in time for normal visual perception. We measure acuity by alternating grating, like in small children, measuring response. And we see that with different pixel sizes, acuity matches pixel pitch. So as much as information as we deliver to the retina, brain can respond to. And with that, we started commercial. Oh, and one other important feature is that we wanted selective stimulation because we want to utilize the retinal signal processing. So the selectivity, stimulation threshold through the network versus direct stimulation of ganglion cells, these are the thresholds shown here, differ by about a factor of 6 or 7. That's our room of selectivity. So we can modulate the brightness within that range and still have selective signal processing, which is important. Okay, so now humans. So we started clinical trial in 5 patients in Paris because the startup was in French. And this is how a human implant looks like. It's 2 by 2 millimeters, composed of 100 micron pixels. And this is implant in a human eye, and this is white, a bright looking area is a blind spot. I'll skip the surgery. So we started with 5 patients, and they were analyzed for 5 years, actually, 2018-23, and then results were very encouraging. We ran much larger trial, pivotal trial in 2023, 2024. Now with 38 patients in 5 countries and 17 hospitals. And results are very consistent, so I'll show you. So basically, patients describe it as bright white patterns of retinotopically correct shapes and locations. This is how the prototype of glasses looks like. This is how it looks on a person. So this is a projector of that infrared light. Okay, so the results are the following. In a pivotal trial, the success was defined as improvement of vision by at least 2 lines on the chart endpoint. And mean acuity with no magnification we measured was exactly 1 pixel size. It's remarkable how reproducible it is. It was 20/418, where theoretical limit of 1 pixel sampling corresponds to 20/420. With electronic zoom that we have outside, patients could read much smaller fonts, and 81% improved by more than 2 lines, 78% more than 3 lines, and on average, it was 5 lines of improvement, as shown here by this red arrow.
When you do this, this is around the central, somewhere around the fovea, you're doing this. So the normal vision there is completely destroyed by this chip.
Normal vision. Well, there is no normal vision to
Is it
begin with.
completely gone?
Yeah, so we implant on patients.
Big comparison of those lines.
Yeah, so you make it
Vision at all.
not at all. There is no the missing central part of the visual field. Their acuity is much lower than normal, so it is like below 2400. You can still measure it. These patients are not completely blind. They see something. They see very large fonts. They can walk around, and that's what you compare. That's called baseline.
And do they see that from using their peripheral vision?
Yeah, right. They use peripheral vision and can read large fonts. Okay, so just some videos of what patients can actually do. So here is a patient reading a book.
And you see.
Can see what camera captures and what we project. We project it with reverse contrast for control. So here is writing. So she needs to find the missing numbers and fill them in just by hand. You will see what she's looking at, but this is what camera captures. And again, we project in reverse contrast, so white on black. This is what she's looking at. She needs to identify missing numbers.
And see 8 and 9 less.
And here is another patient reading signs in subway in Paris. She needs to also find her. And same patient reading names of the stations in the subway. And so on. So as you can see, it's not even letter by letter, it's word by word. What was also very interesting that there was improvement between 6 and 12 months that indicates neuroplasticity, that these patients, we had the whole spectrum now of responses. Some of them see very clear patterns, sharp and straight lines right away. Some say that they see some noise on the background, and some were saying that the lines are not completely straight. But over time, the brain figured out, first of all, remapped the field, the anthropic map and the line straighten up, and also figured out what is signal and what is noise, and the noise disappeared and the pictures became more clear. It's similar to what cochlear implant patients go through when you install cochlear implant. And so it's remarkable that brain can learn this imperfections of the code and improve the perception over time. And that's a very interesting fact that we observed that a couple patients, when they passed away and we were allowed to do histology on their eyes, you can see a pocket where the implant was for 18 months. Here is it magnified. So it's a very benign response. Subretinal space turns out to be very tolerant to presence of foreign body. And this foreign body was here, very close to our target layer of neurons, separated by what we call debris layer of about 40 microns. So it's a very fortunate kind of situation compared, for example, to brain implants, which are much less tolerant to that. And what came after that was a media storm in October 2025, after we published these results in New England Journal medicine, we got this excitement that went way beyond of my expectations. And I'm afraid that it may backfire because this excitement is, I think, overblown in the sense that this is nice proof of concept, but I don't think it is ready for prime time, like for large markets, because we need to improve the acuity further. And this is where we face a serious problem of geometry. Like most of the most fundamental issues are geometrical. This one is one example. Where you scale pixels down, we are talking about confined electric field that scales together with the pixel size, and the penetration is just diminishes such that you cannot stimulate the target neurons. And you cannot compensate it by brute force, by delivering more light, because you will reach thermal limit very soon, and you cannot and you will be limited by amount of charge injection because it scales with the area. And so you cannot brute force yourself in. So how we go about that? So first of all, how we model this. It's not trivial to model because when we have a lot of pixels and they have non-linear elements, diodes, it's very difficult to model it in COMSOL because it just cannot handle multiple non-linear elements very well. So what we do instead, we generate elementary fields in COMSOL, then we compute the response of the circuit, thousands of nonlinear pixels affecting each other through the common electrolyte. As a circuit, as a SPICE modeling in ZEISS, which was developed by Sandia National Lab, it can handle millions of elements. Actually was developed to study how chips respond to radiation and how they damage by radiation. So we use that, and then we recombine it in electric field synthesized from elementary field. So with this pipeline and also using this modeling of neurons, we can tell from clinical measurements, light versus pulse duration thresholds, what electric field it corresponds to. And from this normalization, we can predict what light intensity will be for any other chip. So that's basically the pipeline. And so with that, for example, we can tell that if we just decrease pixel size from 100 micron to 75, the irradiance will go from 3 to 8 milliwatt to a millimeter square, and we will hit thermal limit. So you cannot brute force yourself into smaller pixels, and we really need to change geometry. So instead of flat bipolar pixels, we go into third dimension, pillar or honeycomb, opposite kind of arrangements, where cells are migrating around the structures and getting closer to the electrode. So this way, to some extent, we can alleviate this issue of distance. Or we can play a game of current steering, multiple electrodes adding up and forming more complex electric field, increasing its penetration. Another important feature is in fabrication that photodiodes, if you have this isolated walls, the charges will recombine. And to avoid that, we made diodes which are from all directions basically are doped. So it's a three-dimensional kind of doping, and that allows you to scale pixels down to 20 microns, keep the same quantum efficiency or for the responsivity. Okay, so with all these games, we made next generation of implants with pixels 55, 40, 30, and 20 microns in size, measured acuity. And indeed, with 40 microns pixels, we get exactly pixel pitch in rats. And with 20 microns, we reach their natural limit of vision, 28 microns. So for rats, these pixels are too small. They cannot see that well. But for humans, 20 micron pixels correspond to acuity of 2080. And that's what we hope to achieve in the next clinical trial. And we will use the three-dimensional arrays, and we work now through optimization and manufacturing of that by optimizing stimulation strength, contrast, and selectivity, and these are conflicting requirements. So there is some process of optimization, and we hope it will be manufactured by the companies that licensed our patents, Science Corporation, and tested. So how do we envision what patients see? We have the whole modeling pipeline, but I will skip and just show some examples. So this is a picture of a page of a book, 1984 by Orwell. I think this is the most relevant book these days. Radially reduced acuity looks like this, and blind people see something like that. And our prosthetic vision with zoom allows this sort of kind of reading. That's what you saw on videos. We use zoom to see a smaller size than they could resolve otherwise.
The patient would control the zoom.
Yeah, they choose whatever they like. And then with the next generation, we hope to see something like this, where they will see a page with no zoom and a much more convenient kind of situation. So with that, I will conclude by saying that this Prima implant, Prima stands for photovoltaic retinal implant. That's a product name now. Prima provides monochromatic central form vision in patients with atrophic age-related macular degeneration. Implantation is safe. We have now devices working for more than 5 years. They perceive continuous white patterns. By the way, it's interesting that the stimulation is dotted, but they see continuous lines, so brain fills the gaps. We didn't expect that. Acuity matches pixel pitch. They can read much smaller fonts using electronic zoom. Improvement is 5 lines. And we work now on natural scenes software. What you saw was black and white, just reading, writing. But we are working on software for grayscale, which is important for face recognition. And the fact that we go through the retinal network is very important, we believe, because the retinal code we deliver is close enough to natural that they can see simultaneously peripheral vision with natural code and central with prosthetic. And if you ask them what you see when you show some large object like a big green line, they say, I see green line becoming white and becoming green again. So it's really the brain sees it and it merges, which means that the code is close enough. It's not perfect. We know that it's not exactly, but it's close enough. And that's really the threshold. And everything in medicine is about close enough. It never is perfect, but it is close enough. And so the next generation implant, bipolar rays with pillar electrodes, can have pixels down to 20 microns. And if it works, it provides acuity 5 times better. Down 2080 for driving, we need 2040, so they won't be driving, but it will be with electronic zoom, they can get even 2020, and that will be a functional vision for many patients. So with that, I want to thank our team and our funding collaborators, and thank you and our past contributors, a lot of them. It was 20 years in the making, and thank you for your attention.
I don't know, but
Yes.
David, you're ready to they say first.
It's really an amazing concept and execution. I wonder, since you incorporated the zoom, how much advantage would people have without the operation, but just with projection in the visual range to the peripheral?
Right. Yeah, so that's a very valid point. You can, with zoom, use peripheral vision. Patients don't like as much peripheral vision because it's not wired for high resolution. And we don't have exactly one-to-one comparison because there are no standard kind of zoom arrangements. So what regulatory bodies in Europe told us that we'll compare standard vision to your device, and that includes zoom. But to some extent, with magnifiers, people can improve the reading ability of peripheral vision, but I don't have exact comparison because there is no standard to that. Yeah, but central vision still is wired for high resolution. It's much easier for them to use.
Yeah, this is infrared light going
Right.
into the eye.
Yeah.
How do you stop the lens from working? How do you stop?
No, lens is working. Lens is working. Why do we need to stop it? You deliver an image, right? So basically, you look at the screen, like if you Google Glass, let's say, augmented reality glasses, or Meta have now, you basically look at the world and you have a screen that is overlaid on the world, right? So you see simultaneously 2 images. One is in infrared, the other invisible, but both in focus.
The registration of the two of the
It's self-alignment. Basically, the patient is free to move the eyes like you are looking at the screen. How do you just consciously move to where you want to read, right? That's same here. So you have a display and patient can scan, and it looks, he or she looks at the screen, right? It's self-alignment. There is no active like tracking.
No, but I mean the relative registration of the image you produce on the glass versus the actual world outside.
Right.
There's no, you imagine they have to be
Oh yeah.
aligned.
They have to be aligned, yeah. So the direction kind of in a same point on the screen will be kind of sees through the screen, basically. Yeah, they have to be aligned initially. So there is some fitting procedure when patient put the glasses first. They align it to be like in a
Do
proper
they have to
location.
move their head, or you correct for the eye motion relative to the glass?
No, not that and not that. So they obviously they can move their head to see different parts of the world, but within a range of the screen, they move just their eyes. But we don't track the eye. We don't have eye tracking at the moment. It's not required because you just like with this screen, right? You look at different parts of the screen and just read different, aspects of it. So it's again self-alignment. You don't have to adjust anything.
You have to align it with to go to the fovea.
Well, it is on the fovea. I mean, when you move your eye, your fovea moves, your axis is on the fovea, right? So when I'm looking at you, you are in focus and everything else is out of focus. When I look at David, he is now in focus, you are out of focus, right?
Actually, there's a question back there. Sorry, I'm just gonna round it a little bit.
Daniel, very inspiring talk. Very perseverant in execution.
Thank you.
Looked up online and there is another retinal prosthesis, the Argus retinal prosthesis. Then it was discontinued. Do you know why it was discontinued?
Yeah, the Argus was, Argus was discontinued. It was made by a company called Second Sight in Los Angeles. It's a epiretinal implant with only 60 electrodes. So it's very big, like 0.5 millimeter, spacing. And it was epiretinal. So they have to encode information for spiking ganglion cells, and that turns out to be very difficult. So what patients saw were just flickering light, not shapes. Another trouble was that you stimulate not only ganglion cells under the electrode, you stimulate also all the axons passing nearby. And these axons take information from cells very far away. So patients saw arcs instead of spots, and that was just not useful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for you. We are illuminating her right eye in this case, right?
Right.
What is the left eye doing?
Left eye is looking.
Is it an adjunct?
Yeah, so it's no, there is no confusion. Our brain takes information from both eyes and tries to create merges. For example, if your two eyes have different resolution, one is better than the other, the brain will extract high resolution from a better eye, but still use the second eye for example, stereoscopic vision, so on. So it's additive. If you show, for example, if you look, just wear normal augmented reality glasses, right? Nothing prosthetic. You see a screen, and it appears one eye only sees the screen, right? The other eye is just looking elsewhere, and you still see that screen. It merges, so you don't have to have it on both eyes to create the perception.
The level of zoom is different. Right?
No, zoom is only for prosthetic vision. Certainly not. When they read, they don't magnify everything around. They magnify just the text. Just electronic image is magnified. Not everything else is passive. They just see through the glass. There is no element on glasses that will magnify, normal image. Just that the display has that feature. So you read the text, and only that white text is magnified. But that doesn't create, we were surprised that it doesn't create the conflict. You just, they like reading, they cannot read otherwise anyways. They don't use peripheral vision for reading at the moment, and they just use that central. Yeah.
In the patients that underwent or had the implant, I imagine there were some that did really well relative to others.
Right.
Is there something about their biology that is unique, like maybe the time of diagnosis, that something about it?
Yeah, so far we didn't find anatomical correlation exactly one-to-one with, say, better proximity or better resolution. It wasn't like that. And it's not surprising because all these variations in debris layer are within 1/2 a pixel width. So we are still with 1 pixel can penetrate deep enough. It may be more with smaller pixels. And the only clear correlate was agility. Patients that are kind of smarter, more active, more, interested